The text lit up my phone as I stood in the parking lot, the Austin night buzzing with festival noise, laughter, music, the sizzle of grills. "You won this round, Mia, but I'm not done." My hands froze, the air thick with the smell of barbecue and beer, but all I could feel was the chill of those words. I'd just exposed Ryan, my best friend of 15 years, for stealing my recipes and selling my food truck soul to a rival. I thought that was the end, that I'd taken back what was mine, but the text told me otherwise. Someone else was out there, pulling strings, and I was still in their sights. I shoved my phone into my pocket, my heart pounding, and walked to my truck, the neon glow of Mia's bites flickering in the distance like a beacon I wasn't sure I could trust anymore. I'm Mia Torres, 35, with short dark hair always tucked under a bandana, my faded tees and aprons stained with years of sauce and sweat. I'm a chef, a food truck owner, the kind of person who laughs too loud and trusts too much, pouring my heart into every dish I serve. My truck, Mia's Bites, is my life. Parked in Austin's food truck lots, serving pulled pork sliders and mango habanero tacos to hipsters and locals who line up for a taste. I built it from nothing, just me and a beat-up van, turning my abuela's recipes into something that put me on the map. But that night, as I drove home, the victory over Ryan felt hollow, the text a shadow I couldn't shake. It started a month ago, when Joe, a regular with a graying beard and a love for my sliders, showed me a photo on his phone. It was my dish, right down to the pickled onions, on a rival truck's menu. My heart sank, my hands shaking as I scrolled through their Instagram, seeing my recipes, my brand, passed off as theirs. I stood in my truck, the smell of cumin and pork thick in the air, and felt like I'd been punched. I thought of Ryan, 36, lean and charming, with a grin that could sell anything. We'd met in college, bonded over cheap beers and big dreams, him promising to help me market Mia's Bites while he chased his own hustles. I trusted him, shared every recipe, every plan, thinking we were a team. Now I saw his betrayal for what it was. Jealousy, pure and simple, because my truck was thriving while his gigs crashed. I confronted him the next day, my voice low so Tara, our part-time helper, wouldn't hear. Tara was 22, a college kid with bright eyes and a quick wit, always wiping down counters or joking with customers. Ryan was at the truck, sipping coffee, his laptop open like he owned the place. I asked about the rival's menu, my hands gripping the counter, the heat of the grill warming my back. He shrugged, said it was a coincidence, his eyes sliding away, his fingers tapping nervously on his mug. I knew he was lying. I'd seen that fidgeting before, back in college when he'd forgotten to pay me back for a loan. I didn't push him, not then. I needed proof, not excuses. I went home that night, my apartment small and cluttered, cookbooks stacked on the coffee table, a half-dead cactus on the windowsill. I sat on my couch, a beer in hand, and thought about my abuela, her hands kneading dough in her tiny kitchen, teaching me to cook when I was 10. "Food is love, Mia," she'd say, her accent thick, her smile warm. I'd believed her, built my life on it, and Ryan had taken that love and sold it. The anger burned, but so did the hurt, a deep ache for the friend I thought I knew. I couldn't sleep, the city's hum outside my window keeping me up, my mind replaying every moment, nights tweaking recipes, Ryan's laugh, his promises. How had I missed it? The turning point came a week later, when Tara, her face pale, pulled me aside after a shift. She said she'd seen texts on Ryan's laptop, left open when he'd stepped out for a call. She hadn't meant to snoop, but the words caught her eye. Emails to the rival truck's owner, offering my recipes, my client list, for a cut of their profits. My stomach churned, the betrayal sinking in like a slow poison. I stood there, the truck's grill still warm, the smell of onions lingering, and felt the trust I'd carried for years crack. Tara apologized, her hands twisting, saying she should have told me sooner. But I hugged her, my voice steady. It wasn't her fault. It was Ryan's. I spent weeks gathering evidence, staying late in my truck, the Austin skyline glittering outside. I pulled screenshots, timestamps from my recipe files, even got Joe to write a statement about the sliders. I hired Leo, a lawyer who knew the food scene, his office a mess of legal pads and coffee cups. He warned me that recipe theft was a gray area, hard to prove, but we built a case, piece by piece. I kept working, smiling for customers, but inside, I was changing. The Mia who trusted everyone was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who wouldn't let Ryan take what I'd built. The Austin Food Festival was my chance. Ryan was set to announce his partnership with the rival, a big deal that had put him on the map. I tipped off a food blogger, Lena, who loved my truck and hated cheats. I gave her everything, texts, screenshots, proof. At the festival, I stood in the crowd, my bandana tight, my heart pounding. Ryan took the stage, his grin wide. But Lena was ready, her questions sharp, calling him out in front of everyone. The crowd buzzed, his face paling as she laid out the evidence. The rival owner backed away, Ryan's deal crumbling. I didn't cheer, didn't gloat. I just watched, my hands steady, feeling a quiet triumph, not in his fall, but in taking back my work. As I walked to my truck, the text came, "You won this round, Mia, but I'm not done." I stood there, the festival's noise fading, my hands cold. Ryan wasn't alone. I thought of Tara, her guilt, her honesty. I thought of Abuela, her voice in my ear. I drove home, the city's lights blurring, and knew this wasn't over. Someone was watching, and I had to be ready. I got home, my keys jingling as I locked the door, the text still burning in my mind. My apartment was dark, the faint glow of streetlights slipping through the blinds, casting stripes on the hardwood floor. I didn't turn on the light right away, just stood there, my pulse loud in my ears, the smell of cumin and chili powder lingering on my clothes from the festival. I pulled out my phone, reread the message. "You won this round, Mia, but I'm not done," and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Austin night. Ryan's betrayal was bad enough, but this was someone else, someone who knew me, who'd watched me take him down. I checked the locks again, my hands moving on instinct, and sat on my couch, the worn cushions sinking under me. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but I was alert, like a deer catching a rustle in the brush. I made tea, the kind my abuela used to brew when I was a kid, chamomile with a drizzle of honey, the steam curling up like a memory. I was 8, sitting at her kitchen table, my legs swinging, her hands steady as she stirred the pot, telling me stories about her childhood in Oaxaca. "Trust your heart, Mia," she'd say, "but keep your eyes open." I hadn't listened. Not really. Letting Ryan in too deep. Sharing too much. Now I sipped the tea, the mug warm in my hands, and thought about what I'd missed. Who was behind the text? A friend of Ryan's? The rival truck's owner, pissed I'd ruined their deal. Or someone I hadn't even considered. I pulled out my notebook, a battered thing I used for recipe ideas, and wrote down every name tied to Ryan, every face at the festival, anything that might connect. Morning came, the Austin sun already hot, the air thick with the promise of another sweaty day. I drove to Mia's Bites, parked in the food truck lot near Zilker Park, the skyline glittering in the distance. The truck was my sanctuary, its dented counter and sizzling grill a world I could control. Tara was already there, tying her apron, her ponytail bouncing as she prepped onions. She looked up, her smile hesitant, and asked how I was holding up after the festival. I shrugged, chopping cilantro, the sharp scent grounding me, and said I was fine, but my eyes kept drifting to the lot, watching for anything out of place. I didn't tell her about the text, not wanting to worry her, but I saw her glance at me, like she knew something was off. We opened at noon, the line forming fast, locals and tourists hungry for my tacos and sliders. I worked the grill, my hands moving on autopilot, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the festival, Ryan's pale face, the text. A guy named Carlos with a construction vest and a love for my mango habanero sauce, asked why I looked so serious. I laughed it off, tossing him an extra taco, but his concern stuck with me, a reminder that people saw me, cared about me, even when I felt alone. I thought of my mom, how she'd call me every Sunday, her voice crackling through the phone, telling me to slow down, to live a little. "You're more than your truck, Mia," she'd say. I wanted to believe her, but right now, the truck was all I had. I called Leo, my lawyer, after the lunch rush, sitting in the truck's tiny back corner, the fan whirring. I told him about the text, my voice low so Tara wouldn't hear. He listened, his pen tapping, and said it sounded like intimidation, maybe tied to the lawsuit we'd filed against Ryan. He'd check with a PI he knew, see if they could trace the number, but he warned me to be careful, to avoid poking around alone. I nodded into the phone, wiping sweat from my brow, but inside I was already planning. I wasn't going to sit back, waiting for another text, another threat. I thought of abuela, her hands kneading dough, her voice firm. "You fight for what's yours, Mia." I was fighting, but I needed to be smart. I started digging, quietly, after hours. I went through my email, my recipe files, looking for anything Ryan might have accessed, anything I'd missed. I found an old spreadsheet, one we'd shared for client contacts, and noticed a login from an unfamiliar device, time-stamped weeks ago. My stomach twisted, the truck's hum fading as I stared at the screen. Ryan had been in deeper than I thought, maybe passing more than recipes. I sent it to Leo, my hands shaking, and kept working, serving customers, smiling like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was changing. The trust I'd always carried hardening into something else, something cautious, something fierce. Tara stayed late one night, helping me clean, her hands scrubbing the grill as she talked about her finals. I watched her, wondering if she'd seen more than she'd told me, if she knew who Ryan was working with. I didn't ask, not yet. Instead, I handed her a soda, thanked her for sticking around, and locked up, the lot empty, the city's lights twinkling. As I drove home, I saw a car behind me, a dark SUV, keeping its distance but following too long. My heart skipped, but I didn't speed up. I took a few extra turns watching it in the rear view, and it peeled off, leaving me alone. I parked, my hands tight on the wheel, and knew it wasn't a coincidence. The next day I met Lena, the food blogger, at a coffee shop off South Congress, the kind with mismatched chairs and baristas who knew your name. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a laptop covered in stickers, sipping an iced latte as she listened to my story. I told her about the text, the SUV, my fear that Ryan wasn't alone. She nodded, scrolling through her phone, and said she'd heard rumors about the rival truck, Lone Star Eats, being backed by a shady investor, someone with money and no morals. She didn't have a name, but she promised to dig, her voice low, like she knew the stakes. I thanked her, my coffee untouched, and left, the Austin heat hitting me like a wall. I kept the truck running, pouring myself into every dish, every customer. But I was careful now, locking my laptop, changing passwords, watching the lot for that SUV. I thought of Ryan, his grin, his promises, and felt the hurt shift to something colder, something focused. I wasn't just fighting for my recipes. I was fighting for the life I'd built, the trust I'd earned. One night, as I was closing up, Tara found a note slipped under the truck's door, handwritten, no signature. "Back off, Mia." My breath caught, but I didn't show it. I slipped it into my pocket, told Tara it was nothing, and drove home, the note heavy, the city's hum a warning I couldn't ignore. I drove home, the note crumpled in my pocket. Its words, "Back off, Mia," like a pulse in my head, steady and relentless. The Austin streets were alive, neon signs flickering, music spilling from bars. But I felt cut off, like I was moving through a world that didn't see me. My hands gripped the wheel, my old pickup rattling, and I kept checking the rear view, half expecting that dark SUV to reappear. It didn't, but the weight of being watched clung to me, heavy as the humid night air. I got to my apartment, locked the door, and stood there, my breath shallow, the smell of grilled onions and sweat still on me from the truck. I didn't turn on the light, just sank onto my couch, the note in my hand, its paper cheap and thin, like whoever wrote it didn't care if I took it seriously. But I did. I had to. I smoothed the note out, studying the handwriting under the dim glow of my phone. It was messy, hurried, not Ryan's careful scrawl. I thought of him, his face at the festival, pale and cornered, his charm useless as the crowd turned. He'd betrayed me, sold my recipes, my life, for a shot at the spotlight, but this note, the text, the SUV, they felt bigger, like he'd been a pawn in someone else's game. I pulled out my notebook, the one with my scribbled theories, and added the note to the list. The text, the unfamiliar login, Lena's rumor about a shady investor. My hands shook, not from fear, but from a fire building inside me, the kind that had pushed me to open Mia's Bites, when everyone said a food truck was a gamble. I wasn't backing off. I couldn't. Morning came, the Austin sun already brutal, the air sticky with heat. I made coffee, the bitter smell pulling me back to a memory of my mom, her hands steady as she poured me a cup when I was 16, telling me I could do anything if I worked hard enough. "You've got fire, Mia," she'd said, her smile tired but proud. I clung to that now, sipping my coffee, the mug warm against my palms. I called Leo, my lawyer, and told him about the note, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. He was eating something, probably a bagel, crumbs rustling as he listened. He said it was harassment, maybe enough to get the police involved, but he needed more to tie it to Ryan or the rival truck, Lone Star Eats. He'd pass it to his PI, see if they could dig up anything on the investor Lena mentioned. I thanked him, hung up, and got ready for the day, my bandana tight, my apron stained but familiar, like a second skin. The food truck lot was buzzing when I got there, other trucks firing up their grills, the air thick with the smell of frying dough and spices. Tara was already at Mia's Bites, chopping peppers, her earbuds in, bobbing to music I couldn't hear. She looked up, her smile fading when she saw my face, and asked if I was okay. I nodded, firing up the grill, the sizzle of pork grounding me. But I caught her watching me, her hands slowing. I didn't tell her about the note, not wanting to drag her deeper, but I asked if she'd seen anyone strange around the truck, anyone lingering. She shook her head, her ponytail swinging, but her eyes darted away like she was holding something back. I didn't push. Not yet. I needed her focused, needed the truck running, needed to hold onto the normalcy of flipping tacos and joking with customers. The lunch rush hit hard, the line snaking through the lot, locals and tourists sweating in the heat, their chatter a welcome distraction. I served sliders, poured sauce, wiped sweat from my brow, but my eyes kept scanning the crowd, watching for anyone out of place. Joe, my regular, showed up, his construction vest dusty, his grin wide as he ordered his usual. He asked about the festival, saying he'd heard about Ryan's flop, and I forced a smile, handing him his plate. His kindness, the way he leaned on the counter, talking about his daughter's new job, reminded me why I fought for this truck. The people, the connection, the life I'd built bite by bite. But as he left, I saw a guy across the lot, leaning against a car, his cap low, staring too long. My heart skipped, but when I looked again, he was gone. I kept digging quietly after hours. I went through Ryan's old emails, ones he'd sent me about marketing plans, looking for clues. I found a name. Greg Walsh, a guy Ryan had mentioned once, some investor he'd met at a networking event. I Googled him, my laptop screen glowing in the truck's dim interior, and found a LinkedIn profile. Mid-40s, slick headshot, tied to a venture capital firm with stakes in Austin's food scene. My stomach twisted. Was he the investor Lena mentioned? I sent the name to Leo, my hands unsteady, and locked up. The lot empty, the city's skyline a jagged line against the dusk. I drove home, my truck rattling, my eyes flicking to the rear view. The SUV didn't show, but I felt it, the sense of being watched, like a weight on my chest. I thought of abuela, her hands rolling tortillas, her voice soft. "You're stronger than you know, Mia." I wanted to believe her, but I felt small, caught in a fight I didn't fully understand. I got to my apartment, checked the locks, and sat on my couch, the note and my notebook in front of me. I was close. I could feel it. But to what? I thought of Ryan, his laugh, the way we dreamed of owning Austin's food scene together. Was he just jealous? Or had he been pulled into something bigger, something that wanted me silenced? The next day, Lena called, her voice hushed, saying she'd found something. We met at the coffee shop, the smell of roasted beans and cinnamon thick in the air. She slid her laptop toward me, showing an article about Greg Walsh, tied to a failed restaurant chain. Rumors of shady loans and strong-arm tactics. She said he'd been spotted with the owner of Lone Star Eats, and Ryan had been at their meetings, playing middleman. My hands went cold, the coffee shop's chatter fading. Greg was the investor, I was sure, the one who'd backed Ryan's betrayal, who'd sent the text, the note. Lena warned me to be careful, her eyes sharp, saying guys like Greg didn't play nice. I nodded, my coffee untouched, and left, the Austin heat hitting me like a slap. I kept the truck running, pouring myself into every dish, every smile for a customer. But I was careful, locking my laptop, watching the lot, avoiding late nights alone. I thought of Tara, her hesitation, and decided to talk to her. After a shift as we scrubbed the grill, I asked if she'd seen Ryan with anyone, maybe a guy in a suit. She froze, her sponge still, and said she'd seen him with a man once, outside the truck arguing about money. She didn't know his name, but her voice shook, like she was scared to say more. I hugged her, said it was okay, but inside, I was burning. Greg Walsh was real, and he was close. That night, as I locked up, I saw the SUV again, parked across the lot, its engine off. My heart pounded, but I didn't run, I stared at it, my keys in hand, daring it to move. It didn't, but I felt eyes on me, a silent threat. I drove home, my hands steady, and knew I had to act. Greg Walsh wasn't just a name anymore. He was a shadow, and I wasn't letting him win. I stood in the food truck lot, my keys biting into my palm, staring at the dark SUV parked across the way. The Austin night was thick with heat, the air heavy with the smell of grilled meat and diesel from nearby trucks. But all I could feel was the weight of those unseen eyes, The SUV didn't move, its windows black, a silent challenge that made my heart pound but didn't break me. I'd faced Ryan's betrayal, exposed him at the festival, and now I was staring down something bigger. Greg Walsh, the investor Lena had tied to Lone Star Eats, the man behind the texts, the note, the shadow that wouldn't let me go. I locked Mia's Bites, my food truck, and walked to my pickup, my chin up, refusing to show fear. I drove home, the city's neon lights blurring, my hands steady on the wheel, but inside, I was a storm, ready to fight for what was mine. I got to my apartment, the familiar creak of the door grounding me as I locked it tight. The space was small, cluttered with cookbooks, a half-empty coffee mug on the counter, the faint smell of cumin clinging to my clothes. I sat on my couch, the note. Back off, Mia, and my notebook in front of me. The pages filled with names, dates, suspicions. I thought of abuela, her hands rolling tortillas in her Oaxaca kitchen, her voice firm when I was 12 telling me, "You don't give up, Mia. Not when it matters." This mattered. My truck, my recipes, the life I'd built from nothing. I wasn't backing off, no matter what Greg Walsh or anyone else threw at me. I called Leo, my lawyer, leaving a voicemail about the SUV, my voice calm but urgent, asking him to push the PI to trace Walsh. Then I made tea, chamomile like abuela's, the steam curling up, and planned my next move. Morning came, the Austin sun already scorching, the air sticky as I drove to the food truck lot. Mia's Bites stood proud, its neon sign a little faded, but mine, every dent and scratch a story of my hustle. Tara was there, tying her apron, her ponytail swinging as she prepped onions. She looked at me, her eyes searching, and asked if I'd slept. I smiled, firing up the grill, the sizzle of pork a rhythm I could lean into, and said I was fine, but I caught her watching me, like she sensed the weight I carried. I didn't tell her about the SUV, not wanting to scare her, but I asked her to keep an eye out, to note anything strange. She nodded, her hands chopping faster, and I felt a pang of gratitude for her. This kid who'd stuck by me through the mess. The lunch rush was brutal, the line snaking through the lot, customers sweating in the heat, their chatter loud over the hum of generators. I served tacos, poured mango habanero sauce, wiped sweat from my brow, but my eyes scanned the crowd, watching for that cap-wearing guy, for anything off. Carlos, my regular in the construction vest, showed up, ordering his usual sliders, joking about the heat. I handed him his plate, our hands brushing, and his grin softened, like he saw the strain I was hiding. He lingered, talking about his daughter's new apartment, and I nodded, smiling. But inside, I was holding on to his kindness, a reminder that I wasn't alone, that Mia's Bites was more than a truck. It was a community, a home. Leo called after the rush, his voice crackling through the truck's tiny speaker. The PI had dug up dirt on Greg Walsh, tied to a string of failed restaurants, shady loans, even a harassment case that never stuck. He'd been funding Lone Star Eats, using Ryan to get my recipes, hoping to muscle in on Austin's food scene. The texts, the note, the SUV, they were Walsh's way of scaring me off, keeping me from digging deeper. Leo said the police were interested, but without hard proof, they couldn't move yet. He told me to lay low, let him handle it. But I heard the worry in his voice, and I knew I couldn't wait. I thanked him, hung up, and stood there, the grill's heat on my face, the smell of charred pork thick. I thought of my mom, her Sunday calls, her voice warm. "You're enough, Mia, just as you are." I wasn't enough yet, not until I ended this. I met Lena, the food blogger, that afternoon at the coffee shop, the smell of roasted beans and cinnamon wrapping around us. She was scrolling through her laptop, her iced latte sweating on the table, and showed me a photo from a food event last year. Walsh, slick in a suit, shaking hands with the owner of Lone Star Eats, Ryan in the background, grinning like he'd won something. My stomach twisted, the pieces clicking. Lena said Walsh had a reputation for playing dirty, using people like Ryan, then cutting them loose. She'd heard he was spooked after the festival, worried I'd expose him next. I nodded, my coffee cold, and asked her to keep digging, to share anything she found. She agreed, her eyes sharp, but warned me to watch my back. I left, the Austin heat hitting me like a wall, my hands shaking but my resolve hard. I kept the truck running, pouring myself into every dish, every customer's smile. But I was careful, locking my laptop, checking the lot, avoiding late nights alone. I talked to Tara after a shift as we scrubbed the grill, the air thick with cleaner and grease. I asked if she'd remembered anything else about the man Ryan argued with, the one in the suit. She hesitated, her sponge still, and said she'd overheard Ryan mention a Greg once, saying he was pushing for more, sounded angry. Her voice shook, like she was scared to say it, and I hugged her, my heart heavy. Tara was in this now, and I hated that. But her honesty was a lifeline. I told her to go home, to stay safe, and locked up, the lot quiet, the city's skyline a jagged glow. The breakthrough came a week later. Leo's PI traced the number from the text to a burner phone bought at a gas station near Walsh's office. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough for me. I worked with Leo to set a trap, using the truck as bait. I'd heard Walsh was planning a big launch for Lone Star Eats at a smaller food fair, a chance to rebuild after the festival flop. I tipped Lena again, giving her new evidence. Emails from Ryan's laptop, ones Tara had found, linking Walsh directly to the recipe theft. I asked her to go public, to post it online the night before the fair, timing it so Walsh couldn't dodge the fallout. I didn't tell Tara, not wanting her involved, but I felt her eyes on me, like she knew I was planning something. The night before the fair, Lena's post went live, a blog tearing into Walsh, naming him as the money behind Lone Star Eats, using stolen recipes to climb Austin's food scene. It spread fast, foodies and locals sharing it, the comments lighting up. I stayed at the truck late, prepping for the fair, my hands steady as I chopped onions, the knife's rhythm calming me. I thought of Ryan, his grin, his promises, and felt the hurt soften, not gone, but quieter. I thought of abuela, her hands kneading dough, her voice in my ear. You fight for what's yours. I was. At the fair, I parked Mia's bites in the lot, the crowd buzzing, the air thick with smoke and spices. Walsh was there, his suit crisp, shaking hands, but his smile was tight, his eyes darting as whispers spread. Lena was in the crowd, her phone out, live tweeting the chaos. I stood at my counter, serving sliders, watching as the owner of Lone Star Eats pulled Walsh aside, their voices low, angry. Customers came to my truck, some mentioning Lena's post, saying they'd always known my food was the real deal. I smiled, pouring sauce, but my heart was pounding, waiting for the final blow. It came when Leo called, saying the police had picked up Walsh for questioning, the burner phone and emails enough to start a case. Ryan was cooperating, spilling everything to avoid jail. I hung up, my hands shaking, and felt a quiet triumph, not in their ruin, but in reclaiming my life. The fair ended, the lot emptying, the city's lights twinkling. I drove home, the note, the texts, the SUV fading into memory. But I wasn't the same Mia. I'd trusted too easily, loved too openly. And that girl was gone, replaced by someone sharper, someone who knew her worth. I kept the truck running, hired another helper to ease Tara's load, and started sketching new recipes, ones Ryan had never touched. I visited Mom, cooked with her, laughed over her stories, the smell of her kitchen pulling me back to simpler days. I saw Tara graduate, her cap flying, her grin wide, and felt proud like she was family. One night, months later, I was closing the truck when I found a letter tucked under the wiper. No name, just my initials. My breath caught, but I opened it, the paper crisp. It was from Ryan, handwritten, saying he was sorry, that he'd lost himself, that he'd never meant to hurt me. I stood there, the lot quiet, the city humming, and felt nothing. Not anger, not forgiveness, just a calm I hadn't known I could find. I didn't write back, didn't need to. I burned the letter in my sink, watching the flames curl, and went home. My bandana off, my hair loose for the first time in years. I stood in my apartment, the cactus on my windowsill finally blooming, a tiny pink flower against the green. I thought of abuela, her strength, her love. I thought of the truck, my customers, the life I'd fought for. I'd lost a friend, a piece of my trust. But I'd gained something too. A fire that wouldn't fade, a heart that knew its own beat. As I turned off the light, my phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. "Nice flower, Mia." I froze, my hand on the switch, and looked at the cactus, its bloom bright in the dark. Someone was still watching, but I wasn't afraid. I was ready.